Welcome to Board's Impact Forum's webinar, Purpose, Motivation and Remuneration as Sustainability Drivers. Your host and moderator for today is Steen Buchreitz Jensen. He's a member of the Supervisory Board and Steering Committee of Board's Impact Forum, and he's the CEO of Scandinavian Executive Institute. Steen?
Thank you so much, Liselott. I have been looking forward to host this session today, and we can't have a better timing. Yesterday, the UN Global Summit COP27 opened with a focus on the climate action. So it's a perfect timing to discuss how purpose, motivation, and remuneration can be drivers of sustainability. The agenda of today is that we will have the pleasure of Sonia Tatar from INSEAD Corporate Governance Center, who will share some new insights. And we will have a chance to discuss with experienced chairs and remuneration chairs, Thomas Franzen and Denise Koopmans. Then we will do a poll with you and ask you a few questions, and we will have a panel discussion and have room for your questions. Then we will close in around 1 hour. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. Before we start, I will point your attention to some of the rules of the game. Audience is muted. You can use the chat box for your comments. The chat box is moderated by Cecilia Wiedebeck-West, and please refrain from using it as a marketing tool. The Q&A tab is also open for questions and will be operated by Cecilia and Liselott. The webinar is being recorded, and if you have any technical issues, please send an email to info@boardsimpactforum.com. And it's a pleasure to welcome such a broad international audience. We have 43% of participants are from the Nordic region, 57 from the rest of the world, and we have participants from 24 countries in all. Welcome, all of you. Just a short note on Board's Impact Forum. Board's Impact Forum is part of the Global Climate Initiative in collaboration with World Economic Forum. And the Climate Governance Initiative is organized in 22 chapters across 53 countries. And before we start, I would also like to thank our partners, Boardman, Styrelseskraft, the Swedish Academy of Board of Directors, Directors Institute Finland, Board Network, Styre-instituttet, Scandinavian Executive Institute, and DLA Piper for supporting our work. Let's move on to the first presenter, Sonia Tatar. Sonia is Executive Director at INSEAD's Corporate Governance Center and Wendel International Center for Family Enterprise. She's an advisory board member at NASDAQ Center for Board Excellence and a board member at Chapter 0 France. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steen. And a great pleasure to be here with you, with Denise and Thomas and Cecilia and Liselott, and looking forward to an engaging discussion with also our audience today who have joined us. So let me share, I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to share some insights from the latest research, and the report will be coming out early next year. So this is fresh from the ground, from the practice, talking about nomination remuneration committees being key pillars for sustainable business. There is no doubt that sustainability has become an important agenda item in the boardroom, and nomination and remuneration alignment with the company strategy and ESG have become an imperative. So the study we have done at the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center together with Eric Salmon and Partners Group, it's a global study. We had 270 responses. And the results reveal that 91% of the board members see an increased focus on remuneration and nomination agenda. 70% believe that there is still a clear challenge to translate the strategic sustainability goals and stakeholders' interest to meaningful and measurable KPIs. And finally, 58% see that a call to align C-suite remuneration with company strategy, including ESG target, is still unmet. If we move to the next slide with more data here, I'm happy to share with you. So 97% consider the importance of having nomination remuneration committees. 73% feel their board is taking the long-term strategic view for directors' nomination and renewal. And then 85% believe their board's familiarity with nomination remuneration is actually adequate to what is needed. And also boards are informed about aligning C-suite remuneration with company strategy and ESG. 80% feel that they are informed. However, some other data shows some discrepancy here. We see that, for example, 44% of the board members feel that the committee's role in aligning C-suite remuneration to strategy and ESG goals, only 44%, and then only 16% see that the nomination and remuneration committees are engaged with the sustainability committee. So the question here we would like to raise is that although there is, of course, recognition that the nomination remuneration have a key role to play in aligning the strategic goal, in practice, we still see that there is still struggle. Moving to the next slide, we also see that nomination remuneration are actually considered as levers for boards to manage risk exposure. So they collaborate mostly with the audit, 51%, and with the risk, 38%. Altogether is 89% that it's aligned with the risks they work. The nomination remuneration work mostly with the audit and risk. So looking at the nomination, 95% of boards see it as a strategic risk. 96% see it as a leadership effectiveness risk. On the remuneration, we see that 93% feel it is a reputational risk and 96% see it as a performance risk. This is going back to my comment is that many of the board members, they actually feel that nomination remuneration is associated mostly with the risk. If we move to the next slide, Steen, please, is there are 4 factors that are influencing the C-suite remuneration. The factors are internal, external. So the first one being the company strategy, the compelling vision, clear purpose, long-term strategy, including the sustainability agenda. The second factor is the external, the market competitiveness. So companies and boards need to look at the externalities, means the benchmark, the market practice, the data, the talent pool that is outside that they need to leverage competencies and you name it. And the third factor is actually that we see more and more stakeholders having a voice on the remuneration of the C-suite, whether these are shareholders, investors, owners, boards, proxy advisors, also internally from employees, customers, and more. And the fourth component and factor, of course, aligning all of this with the strategy, with the external, with the stakeholders, is that going into the operational of the strategy. And then there is a need for internal alignment with KPIs, objectives, policies, schemes, ecosystems, and more. Now, of course, when we look at the sustainability, the next slide, Steen, please, is that mostly we look at the business case, because the sustainability is a firm fixture on board business agenda. And there we look at what are the externalities, the paradigm shift, the world change, the regulatory environment that is putting more pressure on boards and companies to actually drive their sustainability agenda. And this involves, of course, changing and adapting the business model to navigate the risk and opportunities, aligning the sustainability agenda with the strategy of the organization. However, what we need to actually acknowledge as well that sustainability is also a leadership agenda. And here, what we see, we can learn from the family businesses, actually. They are value-based leadership. They have their DNA that is based on the doing good. And when we talk about value-based leadership, means embedding key sustainability values in the vision, in the mission, in the strategy, in the leadership behavior. So having the business case on one side is to be complemented by the leadership behavior and the leadership values. And this will align, of course, the company values, the vision with employees' values to ensure further engagement, instilling motivational culture, and also mobilizing and inspiring the stakeholders together so that everyone goes into the same direction. And on that, I would like to share actually that on the next slide is that the leadership to mobilize, motivate, and engage stakeholders, the leadership need to set the right tone from the top. And this is to create a sustainability culture. The business case is great. It's about performance. It's about compliance. It's about building the sustainability, the doing good, and contributing to the 3 Ps. However, we also need to care for the culture internally. And here the top leadership reinforces the values as making them guiding principles to motivate and engage the stakeholders so that everyone is included in this drive and is in this sustainability agenda. So here we look at the boards as stewards. They articulate a clear vision. They set business sustainability aspiration. They anchor the vision on underlying purpose, mission, values. They incorporate incentive compensations. They also model the values and culture, so they need to walk the talk. They also hold the CEO and executives accountable. On the other hand, what we have is that the CEO is the champion. He or she is the figure leader, embeds culture, leadership, behavior, and values at all levels of the organization, ensures individual and organizational objectives, devotes sufficient resources, builds assessment, have feedback, have indicators, scores, so that we can measure all of this sustainability, whether it's relative to the objectives, but also the culture and the behavior. And finally, the executives act as influencers because they are the ones on the ground. They are the ones with the people, with the employees who are actually making things happen. Executives act as the energizers for staff engagement and motivation. They reinforce sustainability values and behavior in the organization. They anchor motivational culture and drive sense of ownership. Once employees and stakeholders feel engaged, they feel the sense of ownership. They feel the inclusion, and then they drive together the sustainability agenda. They empower employees to live by the values, and they plan and manage assessment, reporting for transparency, and of course, they spot and correct and reward behavior and mindset. So this is what I wanted to share with you based on the study that we have done, and I hope this will open, will give us the insights to open the debate later on. Thank you, Steen.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Great findings. Let's come back to them in the Q&A and in the discussion we have afterwards. For now, I would like to hand it over to Thomas Franzen. Thomas is chair of the Remuneration Committee at Tier 2 Avery. He's chair at Bonnier News Group et al. He is a non-executive director at Axel Johnson, Dustin Group, Liliendahl Group, Martin and Cervera, Thunderful Group, Hydroscan Group, and others. And he's a member of the Strategic Advisory Board at Boards Impact Forum. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Steen. I'm pleased to be with you today, and I'm going to touch on some of the topics that Sonia actually brought up in her presentation from a much more, let's say, a more practical angle, and share some examples on how we have been dealing with some of these issues in the companies where I'm working. So let's take the first slide. As Sonia touched upon, the company purpose and the board act as stewardess. I think that's fundamental. And when you look at some of the companies that I'm working with, and I will start with the Axel Johnson company, it's obviously and very, very clear that the fact that you have a family, it's a family-owned company of, actually I probably present Axel Johnson. Axel Johnson is a family-owned company of some 10 billion euros of revenues, and their employment a lot of people, 25,000 people, and it's a family-owned company in the 5th generation, and the family is taking very proud to be part of the development of the society. So it comes very, very natural for the people that works in the board that really support and see that the company is doing good in the society, and we really see ourselves as a driver for being part of changing the world, and also being part of driving the sustainability agenda. So with that, everything else basically comes very natural. So having that very, very strong support from the top, where very committed owners is actually driving it, then everything is very much easier. Another good example of this is at the Bonnier News Group, which is another family-owned company, actually 6th, 7th generation, with some 10,000 employees. And here again, the essence of the company, the fact that the company purpose is freedom of speech and defending independent journalism makes things very, very easy. The way we talk about ESG, it comes very, very natural. It's embedded in almost everything we do, and the way we also work with is not only as a company, but it's also the fact that we are telling stories. It makes it very, very easy for us to engage in the sustainability agenda, also from an editorial point of view. So that also makes things very, very clear, and it becomes just a very natural thing, the way we work with ESG issues, and I would say it's as evident as following the financial performance of the company. We also follow the fact that we are doing good and actually work in a very good way on the ESG agenda. So this kind of proves really that Sonia's point, or actually what she found in her discovery that we heard earlier, that actually it starts from the top, and if you have good commitment from the top and from your owners, a lot of stuff, it becomes really, really easy in terms of implementing. Of course, still a lot of challenges in the implementation, but you have a very sound foundation for making that work in your companies. So I think this is probably the most single important thing, is that if you can get that top commitment from owners and top management, then I think the ESG is as natural as following financial targets. So I think that's the main point on this slide. So next slide, Steen. And then I will just touch on the remuneration of executives, because when you start looking at, how should you actually build in remuneration for executives based on ESG target, it's actually not easy, because it's on the financial side, there's a lot of very measurable KPIs that we can work with, and that we've been working with for a long time, hundreds of years. But in this area, this is pretty new. And still, it's really important to start measuring and to start actually incentivizing on these targets, because as everyone knows, what gets measured gets done. But also, if you start to incentivize things, then also things gets done. I think you have to start somewhere, basically, and you learn as you go. Some targets that is pretty easy still actually to get to is, of course, is CO2 emissions equality and gender equality. And if you still have problems with measuring these things in a good way, another way of doing it is actually to look at specific initiatives. To say, okay, we have problems in getting all the right KPIs into place, but we can still think that within this area, we will start to do a huge impact from a sustainability point of view in our business. And then you start to measure that on a very practical level on how is that actually that initiative doing. So to give you two examples on this, at the Tatar, which is a Nordic tech and IT consultancy with some 25,000 employees. We just recently included in the 3-year long-term incentive programs targets on CO2 emissions and gender diversity. And now it's obvious that the company management needs to improve on these topics in order also to deliver the full value of the long-term incentive programs. And at Justin, which is an e-commerce company in the IT space with some 2.5 billion of revenues, we are also in a situation where we actually has decided the fact that if every computer we sell, we should try to take back the computer that the company, the customer is recycling. So by us putting that into our SDI programs, very specifically pointing at what is the ratio between the new computers we sell and the computers we actually take back for recycling, that actually made a huge difference. And now we are actually moving very quickly in recycling all the computers that we actually sell and take back the old ones. And a very good thing of this as well is that actually is a very good business, because when we started to actually refurbish the computers that we got back, we could actually start to sell them again to other companies where it's not that's important actually to have new computers that actually can live with equipment that it actually is 3-4 years old. So we actually started a new business line based on that initiative as well. But it really started with the fact that we decided to measure it, and we decided to put also yearly targets on the takebacks. So this is just some examples of what can be done in order to support, because I think that actually start measuring and start remunerating your executives on specific ESG targets is super important. And when you start doing it, you actually get the results, as you normally do when you actually start to incentivize people for doing certain things. So this is just some practical examples of how we have worked with some of these issues in the companies that I'm at.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Thomas. Very interesting. And let's move on to Denise Koopmans. Denise is non-executive director and chair of the audit committee at Sanoma. She is non-executive director and chair of the Remuneration Committee at Royal Bank Group. She is non-executive director and chair of the M&A committee at Swiss Post, and non-executive director and chair of the audit committee of stakeho. and she is also a member of our Strategic Advisory Board at Boards Impact Forum. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Steen, for the introduction and for having me here. Good morning, everybody. I've been asked by the team of the Boards Impact Forum to share with you today my experience as chair of the Remuneration Committee of Royal BAM Group in relation to sustainability. And I will craft my story around the 4 topics which are indicated on the slide. Before I start, maybe a short introduction about Royal BAM Group. BAM Group, which I would call it, is a European construction company that designs and builds sustainable buildings, homes and infrastructure. It's a company listed on the Euronext in Amsterdam, and it generates approximately 7 billion of annual revenues with about 15,000 employees. And as you probably all know, the construction sector is one of the most polluting sectors. And I must say, it's also fair to say that the sector as a whole is very well aware of its responsibility to reduce its CO2 emissions. So a lot of construction companies are having plans in place to see what they can do to reduce their footprint, the carbon footprint. And it means for Royal BAM Group, or BAM Group, as I want to say, that ESG, and in particular sustainability, is high on the agenda of both the supervisory board and the executive board, as we have it in this company. It's a 2-tier board. And there's a clear conviction across the whole group that they, as one of the biggest European construction companies, have to lead the way in finding innovative solutions to reduce the carbon footprint in the construction sector. And as my colleagues already indicated, Sonia and Thomas, I think when it comes to sustainability, it all starts with a purpose, a vision and a strategy. That's where it starts with. And BAM is one of the few large companies that have set science-based targets to reduce its CO2 intensity of its operations by 50% in 2030 compared to 2015. And furthermore, it is committed to maintain its place on the CDP Climate Change A list. And these targets, together with the financial targets, are integrated in the overall group strategy, which is anchored around its purpose, its overall purpose of the group, which is building a sustainable tomorrow. And it means also that BAM Group doesn't have a separate ESG strategy, because in our vision, sustainable ways of working are a prerequisite for the way you want to run your operations and exercise your business activities. And in the overall corporate strategy, you see also that there's a very strong focus on people and planet. And that encompasses several aspects, for example, the use of sustainable building methods, in the innovative industrialized ways of working, electric transport, but also offering a rewarding, safe, diverse and healthy work environment to its employees. And last but not least, delivering increased well-being and social value to the communities it serves. And since innovation is such an important driver of achieving our sustainability objectives, we call it also our innovation and sustainability journey. And journey because we're partially navigating through uncharted territory. We're learning and improving every day, but sometimes don't even know how to achieve some of our targets. So let alone how to measure them, as also Thomas was mentioning. And if you take, for example, our targets for reducing the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, we looked at for ourselves what we thought are important, ambitious, and somehow achievable targets. And despite the ambitious targets, we said we have recently been challenged by external stakeholders like NGOs and CDP. And as an example are the targets set for the scope 3 emissions, where we and others don't even know how to consistently measure and accurately measure them. So there's definitely some navigating through in the dark. When it comes to sustainability, I think it's important to set the right priorities. I just mentioned briefly already influence of stakeholders. I think for companies, it's important to drive their own sustainability agenda and decide what they think is important to avoid that competing shareholders, as we see, decide for you what the target should be. And we see a growing number of stakeholders who want to be involved in the discussion around the sustainability strategy and come with their own wish list of targets. And it can be one shareholders at the AGM with the specific requirements regarding, for example, diversity. But increasingly, we see non-shareholders like NGOs seeking the confrontation, like Friends of the Earth, who prosecuted Shell. And more recently, the 30 biggest listed companies in the Netherlands, including BAM Group, received a letter of Friends of the Earth asking companies to step up their ambitions and expressing their wish to be involved in the strategy discussion of the company Otherwise, they would start legal proceedings as they did for Shell. And they also used the media for naming and shaming companies, including even the CEO. So there was a bus stop with a big poster saying on the CEO of BAM Group, where do you take the earth? Interesting enough, even companies with ambitious targets like BAM Group and, for example, DSM, another big listed company in the Netherlands, were targeted. So they were not only focused on companies which really had to step up, but also companies with ambitious targets were targeted in this mailing of Friends of the Earth. And when I talked with a colleague at the board of Shell recently, they were wondering how they, as a company, from a corporate governance perspective, can take responsibility for a strategy which is imposed by a court and not developed by themselves. So it raises quite interesting questions around responsibility and also D&O insurance. And some NGOs, like for example, the WWF, are offering even consultancy services to help companies define their ESG strategy, and if necessary, are willing to stand next to the company to defend its strategy in public. And in South Africa, I've heard that there are apparently legal proceedings by NGOs competing with each other in having their demands implemented. So there's definitely a new movement where you have to take into consideration if you're a public company. So once we've assessed our KPIs, how did we translate those in the remuneration? It was a little bit like Thomas is saying, and also Sonia pointed out how important it is. It should be integrated in the KPIs. And since most companies focus on the long-term value creations, the KPIs for management should include, next to the financial objectives, also non-financial objectives like ESG. And these strategic objectives can be included in the LTI. In the case of BAM, that's a 3-year period. But it's getting also more common to have them in the STI, which is in the case of BAM Group 1 year. And the challenge is, of course, that you can't have too many targets and too many KPIs, because it has to be meaningful and also attractive for management, because you want to focus and steer them in a certain direction where you think the company needs development at that moment. And at BAM Group, we decided to include in the STI 30% non-financial targets, like employee engagement, safety, carbon intensity, and waste reduction. And in the LTI, we included 33% longer-term non-financial ambitions like CDP ranking and carbon intensity reduction. And furthermore, we have the intention to include in the future TSR peer group, which accounts for 33% in the LTI of BAM Group, companies who are outliers in the domain of sustainability, even though they're active in different business sectors. And by the end of the performance period, the company performance is obviously measured in the best way we can do it, performance levels assessed as a base for payment. And we report about this in the remuneration report, which, as you know, needs a positive advisory vote at the AGM. Concluding, I concur with my colleagues, ESG doesn't stand alone, but is part of a bigger story on how you want to run your business. I think it needs to be embedded in the purpose, vision, and mission of the company. And investors and increasingly also banks, business partners, customers, and employees ask for your ambitions in the domain of sustainability. I think it also, as Sonia pointed out, requires a different, more value-based leadership. And the role of the board in driving this agenda and walking the talk is crucial. Tone at the top is important. And at BAM Group, the ESG ambitions have been developed between board and management and are endorsed by all the board members. And furthermore, we recruited an additional expert board member specialized in sustainability and installed next to our Remuneration Committee, Audit Committee, and Nomination Committee, a 4th committee called Health, Safety, and Sustainability Committee. And that committee is helping the company drive the sustainability agenda. And this committee always starts its meetings with a net zero carbon moment, and our board meetings always start with a safety moment, where we showcase best or worst examples. And furthermore, the whole board went on, together with the executive team, on a sustainability seminar. This is just an example of how we at BAM Group, being a company in one of the most polluting sectors, tries to walk the talk and make ESG part of the way we want to run our business. And I'm very happy to hear views and questions and remarks about our approach. Thank you, Steen.
Thank you so much, Denise. Very, very interesting to hear your cases as well. We will come back to questions. Before we do that, we will ask you to answer a poll. We have 3 questions for you. One question is, on your board, has your board ensured a clear company purpose and high sustainability ambition with the reasons behind this ambition? And the next question will be, has your board organized a leadership appointment and motivation development governance in an effective way? And the third one will be on, does your board have an appropriate motivation linkage for the top leadership team, including sustainability? Please take a moment to answer these questions. I would like to get back to Denise and Thomas and ask you to stay, to activate your videos and unmute. I have, and Sonia as well. I have a few questions which we can take before we see the results of the poll. It seems that there's a big difference in Denise's case with public listed companies and Thomas's with the family-owned companies. The owners seem to be able to drive change in a different way in a company, in a family-owned company, obviously. What are the implications for the boards, Denise, in a public company where you are you able to take to have the right discussion with the stakeholders? You mentioned that you engage with stakeholders, but is it possible to learn from the family companies?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Steen. It's an interesting one. I agree. You know, family companies often have this even longer view and are less driven by the demands of the day as you have in a listed company. So, but I think, you know, in listed companies, people realize that this longer term view and this commitment on sustainability is crucial also for the future. If they want to have a secure future, if they want to make sure that they still exist, they have to make sure that they develop a longer term view on sustainability. And as I said, you know, increasingly investors, but also banks in the financing arrangements, they ask also for KPIs on sustainability, but definitely the employees. If you want to recruit people nowadays, you have to make sure, you know, that you have a credible sustainability agenda. Otherwise, they don't want to join your company. In our case, we had, as a board, we were convinced that we wanted to be ambitious on the sustainability. So it was really something endorsed by the whole board, including management team. And we said, you know, we want to go for that because we have a responsibility there. And it is true, we have stakeholders, influencers, like the NGOs, investors, obviously, as well. We thought also, you know, should we also include, for example, customers and ask them what their views are on the remuneration and how we should involve them on the target. But we see, for example, that bigger customers still try to stay away from that discussion. Obviously, in doing business, customers ask for your targets and your scope 3 emissions and that whole thing. But I mean, they don't mingle yet into the discussion of the remuneration KPIs. No. The NGOs do, but not the customers.
Thanks, Denise. Liselott, do we have some results of the poll? So for the first question, it seems that a majority agree or fully agree that they have a clear purpose on sustainability and the reasons behind it. 58% agree and 21% fully agree. Only 4% disagree. So it seems we have an audience that is motivated around these issues. Sonia, are there any surprises in these results compared to your research?
Actually, not really, because as we can see is that more and more, going back to your question to Denise, for example, indeed, the family businesses have the DNA in them of doing good, which is caring for people, caring for, you know, and looking at the external, at the long term. But more and more companies today, anyway, if I say it, is that they have no choice, actually. Regulators are there, activists are there, so they are taking the leap into moving into the strategic direction, the long term, and also having a purpose, because this is, although we say it should not be driven by compliance, but at the same time, compliance helps tick a little bit how you say it is that helps motivates and helps push the button a little bit further. So I don't see any surprises from the result.
Let's look at the other. I don't know if I scroll. Does it change on your slides as well? The second question: has the board organized leadership appointment, motivation, and development governance in an effective way? A little over 0.5% agree, and 33% neutral, and 4% disagree, and 4% fully disagree. So no one fully agrees. So it seems this is a topic here to address for more boards. And let's move to the third one. Is there a motivating linkage for the top leadership team, including sustainability? 4% fully agree and 33% agree. And I think that's also in line with what we talked about earlier, that we know that we need to, as a board, we need to move in the right direction, but making it work and setting the right addressing it in a proper way in the leadership team is more challenging. There is one question in the Q&A that I would like to raise. It's around how to sustain the remuneration program if you change executive and CEO. Does any of you have any of you experienced that you have a program that is actually up and running and working quite well, but then the CEO changes? Are you able to maintain it, and what are the requirements for the board in a situation like that?
I could answer that, Steen. I mean, it actually happened to me once, but it doesn't really change anything in terms of how the board looks at the issues. So the CEO, the targets that has been put is also kind of just more or less automatically transferred to the next CEO coming into place, because the CEO is just in that case is just a tool for the board to make the sustainability agenda work. So no, the answer is probably no. It's not changing anything.
No, and I can add to that, I fully agree. It's driven by the board as a whole. And if you get a new CEO on board, it's like having a strategy, isn't it? An existing strategy. If it's part of your overall purpose, the way you want to run your business, it's including your strategy, then that new CEO takes on this new strategy. And if the CEO is not concurring with the strategy, then it probably won't get on board, isn't it? That's normally how it goes. But it's a much bigger theme than only having a new CEO or not. I think it's profoundly how you want to run your business.
Yeah.
And if I can build on that, Steen, actually, as I mentioned earlier, is that the board who set the strategy, who set the direction, and it's for the CEO and the executives to actually be accountable and responsible. So if there is a change, the accountability is still to the next one who joins.
Yeah. I would also like to ask the three of you. You have heard the questions, the presentations from each of you. Do you have any comments or questions to each other, having heard?
Well, I could put a question to Sonia based on the research, because since I'm very much working in family-owned companies, it's a lot of these kind of company purpose and comes very, very natural. But it's also the fact that when you're dealing in a company where there is less visibility on the ownerships, like more institutional owners and stuff, can you actually see the same clear push versus ESG also in that environment? Or what kind of differences do you actually see in the family-owned space and the more institutional-owned space?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Thomas, for this. And actually, we have done another study on family business, separate one, that showed that actually family businesses have their DNA, they have the doing good and the purpose driven in their DNA ingrained already. Relative to the institutional, however, what we saw, the challenge for them there is how to communicate that, because since it is in their DNA, it's becoming part of their strategic direction operation, but the institutionalization of that, they struggling with it. Going to the other companies, the corporate businesses, what we see is that of course, there is still a focus on, yes, we are going towards the sustainability, we are driving this agenda, and there are still the elements which I mentioned earlier, the value base that is lacking a little bit. There is much focus on the business agenda and the sustainability case agenda versus looking also at the leadership agenda, which is coming in our study as well. I don't know if I responded to your question, Thomas, but that's what we have seen the difference. On one hand, the family businesses are more on the values-based leadership, and they are driving their agenda based on that, while the corporate is on the business case. So there should be a balance between both, basically.
Thanks so much.
Steen, there's an interesting question I saw in the chat, which is maybe also good to address. Somebody asking, why should we incentivize management for doing good? Shouldn't it be done anyhow? And I think that's a question you hear more often, you know, also from in the press you read about it. I think, you know, if you set KPIs, it's because you want to give the business a certain direction, want the company to develop in the areas where you think it's necessary, and you want to create focus. And, you know, just as you have financial targets, where you could also say, you know, if you don't, why should you have financial targets? But you have those as well, because you think, you know, it has to be achieved, and you remunerate for people for an effort they make in this domain. So just in the same way as you have financial objectives, it's also good, I think, to have ESG objectives. And I think it goes beyond remuneration and KPIs, because you need really to be motivated to go that way, because it's not an easy way either. In fact, financial objectives are relatively more easy, I think, than even ESG objectives. So I think management is should be really motivated to go that way, and it goes much further than only fulfilling KPIs or compliance or anything like that. It's not an easy way, you know. It's not easy for companies to find a way. I told it's about innovation, so you're navigating in the dark. So I think it's a reason even more to remunerate people for that.
Yeah,
do a good job there.
Thank you, Denise. I didn't see all. I understand that there are a lot of good questions in the chats. Thank you all for that. Maybe it's the same question, but Ravi asked if we really need to be remunerated to get it done. But you can also see the question as, can we drive it? Can it be purpose-driven? So if we have the right purpose, do we need remuneration as well? Thomas?
Yeah, I absolutely believe we need remuneration. The fact, you know, in a kind of perfect world, you know, everyone should be purpose driven anyway, and you know, you don't really need remuneration to do good. But you know, it's we are remunerating our executives on financial performance in many ways, and so then is the balancing is very important. So if you have no remuneration whatsoever on doing good stuff like the ESG, you know, it's CEOs normally are very result driven, target oriented people, and if you then have a very firm set of targets on the financial part of what they're doing, but no targets really on the ESG part of what they are doing, you know, they will tend to lean versus what they are measured on and what they're incentivized on. And I think that's just the way it is, and it's natural. And So if you want things to happen also on the ESG side, you need to incentivize. Otherwise, less things will happen.
And Steen, thank you, Thomas, for that. And Steen, actually, let us remember that traditionally we always talked about shareholder capitalism. The movement has shifted to stakeholders capitalism. So the mindset needs to change, and to have that mindset change, of course, having remuneration, having focus, like Denise has said, would actually push towards that direction. Otherwise, there are still some mindsets that are stuck with the shareholder capitalism and with financial performance. While here we are looking at, of course, financial viability, sustainability, performance, but then also the doing good, the positive impact on the planet, and contribution to the people. So it's a motivation to guide actually the organization towards that direction.
And it's also helping management to make the right trade-offs, isn't it? It's short-termish versus long-termish. So I think you should help management also which trade-offs you want them to fulfill.
Yeah. Liselott, do we have a last question in the chat?
I think there's a question around the SMEs, and I know we have a lot of them especially in the Nordics, and most of them, and most of the SMEs don't have sustainability in their strategy. So how can boards also of larger companies try to help and push so that they get a focus on this topic?
Well, I can say something about it. I'm also on the board of a smaller company, if you want to say so, listed, but smaller sized. And I think also for smaller companies, they still have a focus on sustainability. It's maybe not as crafted as you see, for example, in the bigger companies which have a lot of resources. But I mean, also they, in their way, pursue a sustainability agenda. I think where it is a little bit more difficult is for companies, which have not, like, for example, a construction company or a chemical company, an obvious road to go. If it's not so obvious where you pollute or where you, for example, have to reduce emissions, then I think for companies it's more difficult. You have to look deeper, what could be then the right KPIs for that business. I'm also on the board of Sonoma. They have, of course, like also Thomas said, very different KPIs, for example, access to education for students. So for those companies, it's sometimes not so obvious to find the right KPIs next to free press and all the other things. So I think especially smaller companies which are not in the obvious zone of polluting, for them it's more difficult to find the right KPIs and then incentivize the management. That's at least my experience.
I remember, Denise, in your presentation, you also mentioned that you took the ambition on, although you don't know what the solutions are yet. So it requires that you are brave and you and maybe that's more challenging for a smaller company that don't have financial room to make bold decisions like that. So in many situations it requires you to make a decision to do something, although you don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, you see, for example, a company like Maersk is very strong on that. Say, we want to be there and we don't know yet how to get there, but we'll find out on the road. And I think that's how we work as companies. We try to improve every day. But I think that's also for smaller companies. It's the same. If you have a very big company, it's also not so easy to change course. And the way you do business has repercussions if you're listed, for example. But I think it's definitely navigating through uncharted territory for a lot of companies.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We are running out of time. I think if you all, the three of you, have one recommendation for our panel and for our participants, what would that be? Who wants to start? Thomas?
Yeah, I know. So the recommendation is really to start to get going when it comes to remuneration issues. And you don't have to be perfect at your first try. And there's always very easy to say that, we can't start measuring this because the KPI is not perfect. But then you basically say, okay, well, we will develop the KPIs over time, and they will become perfect, but we still need to measure. And in some instances, then we kind of, if we don't have the right, let's say the big KPIs, we then basically say, okay, let's look at this initiative then that is actually going in the right direction. And then we start measuring that initiative and put it into the SDI for the management. So I think that would be my first recommendation. Start doing things and start measuring things, and you don't need to be perfect when you start.
Thanks, Thomas. Sonia?
From my point is, I think what is important is the communication as well. So of course we spoke about the business case, the value-based leadership, but between all of this, it's so important to report, monitor, but communication is huge in here, which also generates motivation, whether, you know, communication of success or achievement, but also communication of learning from what did not work. And where I go back to the point of Thomas, it should not be perfect from the start. Sustainability is a journey, so that at some point there should be recalibration. Looking at KPIs and saying, okay, this is too ambitious. We cannot, actually, we cannot achieve that for this timeline, or we cannot do it all. Choose, one of our faculty says, choose your sweet spot first and work on it versus trying to do many things at the same time.
And Denise?
Yeah, I concur with Sonia. ESG is a journey. I mean, you know, it's a journey, and I would say from my perspective and experience, include your stakeholders, but set your own agenda. And if you sometimes think, you know, it's complicated, you're not alone. So everybody is a little bit struggling and trying to find a way around. So it's all about innovation, trying to find new ways of doing business. Start with small things, with pilots, and see if they work, but don't expect to have the final solution already about how you can do things differently. You know, it's a work in progress. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you so much. I will share the last slides to summarize everything. First of all, thanks thanks to the audience and the participants, but also thanks to the presenters, Sonia, Thomas, and Denise. I would also like to thank Cecilia and Liselotte for organizing this. Without their help and their effort, we wouldn't be able to do this this presentation. And also thanks to our partners for their support in this important work. If you want to learn more and explore this area more, please pay attention to Board's Impact. Join Board's Impact Forum. You can do that on our webpage. You can also find information on what's going on at COP27 on the blog post and on the webpage. You can find links to future webinars. There's one. There are two in November that we can recommend, and also there's the INSEAD Directors Forum on November 25th to 26th with governance imperative for a new world order. It's at INSEAD. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and the discussion. At least it was a great pleasure for me. I enjoyed the panel and the different perspectives very, very much. Thanks all of you for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.